Today we're at the Forever Wild land track at the Pike County Pocosin. This is a nature preserve and recreational area. Now this is an area that's historically was old beach dunes. So we have relic beach dunes that are now forest in South Alabama. And because of this area having that very sandy soils and substrates, it doesn't hold a lot of moisture in the soil. So we're going to see examples of a few animals and a lot of different plants today that exhibit various adaptations to live in these environments where you have very sandy soils. So it's hard to see from here, but we'll go to other areas where all the vegetation has been removed or that's opened up. Now the Pike County Pocosins are known as a xeric environment. So water is going to be very limited in this environment. Not that it rains any less here in South Alabama from one place as it does from the next, but these are very sandy soils left over from relic beach dunes when sea levels were much higher. So we're going to see several examples today of plants and a few animals that have adapted to these conditions. Here we're surrounded by bracken fern. So bracken ferns are known to have toxic substances, so that prevents herbivores from grazing on them. They're also known to have very deep roots, so the ability to extract moisture from the soil is much better with the roots reaching, I think, over 6 feet. Bracken fern are also very fire tolerant. So in this case, it's very well adapted for this environment that has these sandy soils that doesn't hold moisture and is definitely fire prone. Another adaptation we'll see will be corms. So you'll have bulbs at the base of some of these plants. This would be a blazing star. And you have this bulb or this corm that retains moisture and nutrients in these xeric environments. Plant that guy so he'll be here next year. Makes a nice flower. We're in the middle of a planted longleaf pine forest, but longleaf pines are unique in their ability to live in these frequently burned areas, naturally burned, as well as these xeric environments. So here we have, as an example, a small, probably 1-2 year old longleaf pine tree. Now, for the first 3 to 5 years of their life, they go through what's called a grass phase. So it basically looks like a patch of grass, just like much of the other grass behind me here. But during this phase, it basically puts all of its energy into the root system so that it can attain the nutrients and the moisture that it needs in these soils that don't hold a lot of moisture. So in this case, it will probably be not much bushier than this and no more woody debris on it, no more stems. For another couple years, and then once it reaches that established point of a nice root system, then this tree will shoot up very quickly. Now longleaf pines also are commonly infected with a type of fungus. Now these frequent fires of the southeast that naturally would occur every 1, maybe 3, 5 years, one of the benefits is that these fires and this smoke basically knock back this fungus and allows the longleaf pines to thrive even more. So in addition to that, with these frequent fires, the plants that were not adapted were commonly just burnt back without the ability to recover, while at the same time everything that's burned is adding nutrients to the system for all these other plants that are adapted. Now, whenever we're talking about a longleaf pine tree, we're talking about needles approximately 1 foot long. We're talking about a cone. This usually about maybe 8 to 10 inches long. And we're talking about the species that dominated the southeast prior to European settlers and basically the deforestation of North America. Another species adapted to these xeric conditions include the hawthorn. Now the hawthorn, if you look very closely here, see if we can get a little bit of focus going on. You can see the, oh, there it came, the thorns. Come on. The thorns. Makes you want to think twice about taking a bite out of this plant. So not a very good food source for herbivores. Now also you see the leaves are quite small. Waxy cuticle helps eliminate the extra evaporation or transpiration or evapotranspiration. In addition to that, another adaptation that we'll see a few species here that exhibit today is that the leaves actually rotate. So these small leaves will rotate with the sun so that they're oriented in such a fashion that they don't get direct sunlight, so that they don't lose as much moisture through the surface of the leaves due to evapotranspiration. See if we can get a close up of the spines. Ooh, they're sharp. They make a nice toothpick, but you don't want to try to eat that. Here we're looking at a small turkey oak. So the turkey oak, likely getting its name from the leaves. These also rotate the leaves so that they don't get direct sunlight to cut down on the loss of water or desiccation. Sorry, I got distracted. A little bit of caterpillar here. Now here we have an example that in the past, at least, there was a large mound here. You can kind of see it, the crest of it here. But what we had was this large crescent-shaped mound. And what lived here was the fungus gardening ant. And these guys are unique in that they only consume a fungus that they raise. And if they were to move their colony somewhere else, they would take a little bit of that fungus with them. Now they'll bring in other resources to actually let the fungus grow on. But one of the major issues, and likely why we don't have the fungus gardening ant here today, is the invasive species, the fire ants, which we all love. But typically whenever you think of ants, you think of fire ants and sugar ants and whatever name we use for the other ant that bites you. We don't think about the diversity of the other species that we don't really know about. So one of those being this fungus gardening ant. But the competition with these invasive fire ants, which actually I stuck my tripod leg in just while I was trying to set up to film here, are likely the reason why these guys are gone. Sad story. So while we're here reminiscing about ants that used to exist in this local area, the fungus gardening ant mound is about 30 feet in that direction. Right here in the middle of this trail used to be the big-headed sandhill harvester ant. Now that ant was unique to this environment in that they actually go around and pick up seeds and stuff from the local vegetation, and they take them down into their more fire ants. Look at that. They take them down into their burrow and they hold these seeds as kind of like a catch or a reservoir for consumption, obviously. And whenever it rains, those seeds get wet and they'll start to decompose, and then they're no good to the ants and could cause various problems in the colony. So these big-headed sandhill harvester ants will actually pull those seeds back out of the colony, back out of the burrow or the mound, and they'll lay them on tiny bits of charcoal that they gather from the surrounding area, because these areas are fire prone, and that charcoal heating up and being very dry dries these seeds. So they individually place these seeds on top of charcoal, dry them out, and then take them back down into the colony or the mound. Here we have the blue jack oak. So the leaves here have a thick waxy cuticle to prevent the loss of water. And at the same time on the underside, that's early in the season, but you get this pubescence, these small hairs basically on the underside of the leaf. So with that, the top gets the direct sunlight and heats up. The bottom has that increased surface area so that it cools it off. So heat from the top, cool from the bottom. So this is potentially a 6-line racerunner or some other type of skink. It's excavated this small burrow basically to get out of the heat. Great adaptation. Now here we have various types of reindeer lichen. So I'm not going to pick these, I love them. But you can see a few different kinds here. This is moss, don't pay attention there. But the greener color here with the red tips on them, those fruiting bodies, is one variety. We have the puffballs back in the back. Now these are unique in that they can grow in these dry environments, and they're actually a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungus. So if you were to look at a microscopic view, you have these fungal hyphae, those like filament looking things, right? And they wrap around these individual or little clusters of algae. So algae, we know, typically we think of it as green and gross, so it's green. Photosynthesizes, so it can make nutrients from sunlight and carbon dioxide. And fungus, in this case, has the ability to basically accumulate moisture and dew from the air. So it provides the moisture to the algae, and the algae provides the nutrients to the fungus, and we have these reindeer lichens. Very careful getting out of here. We have a gopher tortoise burrow. It's hard to tell if it's active. Here we have poison oak. I don't really want to touch it too much, but on the underside, you have this pubescence. You have these, I don't think we can focus well enough, but you have these microscopic like hairs. So similar to the blue jack oak in that the tops of the leaves heat up, but the underside has a much larger surface area, so it allows to cool the leaves down. It's also contains toxins that irritate a lot of people. So another way to prevent herbivores from consuming this species. Now that I look at it, I'm just standing in the middle of poison oak. All right, we'll see how it looks tomorrow. Here we have a nice sized gopher tortoise burrow. All those spider webs, it doesn't look like it's very active at the moment. Let's see if we can find some more. And here we have yet another gopher tortoise burrow. Once again, spider webs. Doesn't look to be recently active. So although it's quite hard to see, here we have, I don't know the species right offhand, but we have another adaptation to this xeric environment. See the reduced leaves. So the leaves here are so small that you don't have a lot of surface area for the sun and for these dry conditions to heat up the leaves and cause this plant to lose water. So we have reduced leaves. Can be a common adaptation in dry and xeric environments. Now here we have a nice gopher tortoise burrow. As much as I want to dig it out and look in there, I'm not going to. This is a protected species that are pretty rare these days. Now gopher tortoises are special for several reasons. One, they're known as a keystone species, and that's kind of the big thing is that they dig these big burrows that can be several feet deep, many feet long. I've heard, talking to other consultants that have actually had to relocate gopher tortoises, that they get well over 6 foot deep and can be 30+ feet long with sometimes branching chambers. Now, in an environment like this where it's quite inhospitable during the summer. It gets really hot, it's really dry, there's not a lot of water. We've talked about these sandy soils just not being a very hospitable area to be out in this heat. Uh, so this big burrow creates a home for uh, dozens and dozens of species. So there are some 50, maybe 60 species that really cohabitate with gopher tortoises and live in these burrows. And there's other benefits of the gopher tortoises as well. We talked about earlier that gopher tortoises are one of the few species that can eat the prickly pear cactus. So because of this, they're able to spread the seed. Here we have a nice example of the prickly pear cactus. So once again, spines that may make good toothpicks, but definitely make you not want to eat this thing. Now, a few things. One, at the base of the spine are little bitty spines, so I'm probably going to get them all in me. It's like fiberglass. Another thing is the prickly pear cactus has this waxy outer cuticle, like some of the others that we've seen, but this being much thicker. And cacti have a special type of photosynthesis. It's called cam photosynthesis. So with these, they're able to actually close their stomata, the openings in the leaves that draw in the carbon dioxide. They close those in the day. And then at night, they open them up and they're able to pull in that gas. And this also helps prevent the loss of water. Now, another neat thing about the prickly pear cactus, and that may be, I'm not sure, but I've seen a lot of signs of various prickly pear cactuses with little chunks taken out of them. So the prickly pear cactus is a good food source for the gopher tortoise. Now they have a hard bony plate in the upper portion of their mouth so that basically these spines don't give them problems, and they're able to consume these. Now also, whenever these prickly pear cactuses bud and flower, they make little fruits that you can actually eat. I'd advise you to be careful unless you know what you're doing, but they're quite tasty, they're sweet, and you can actually make a jelly or a preserve out of them once they fruit and turn that reddish purple color. Not at this point. It's really fun walking through this area, guys. Know that I must love you a lot because all the poison oak and this bracken fern, all the dead leaves, they kind of look like rattlesnakes laying on the ground. Beautiful though, just beautiful. And out of the poison oak into the bracken fern that looks like rattlesnake skin, and then out of the bracken fern through the southern dewberry, that's aka briars. So I don't know how well you can see here, but in amongst this longleaf pine forest, we have some pine trees that we're looking at here that have much shorter needles. So while typically in this area of South Alabama, you would probably see those short needles and think more about the shortleaf pine. These are actually, well, quite a lot of them are dead. I don't know what's going on here, but these are the Florida sand pines. Now the Florida sand pines are really neat in that there's, at this point we're calling them two different races. So there's the Choctawhatchee race, and then there's the Ocala race. Now, with one of these races are known to occur more along the coast, and they take basically a large amount of moisture and then the wind to disperse the seeds out of the cones. Now, whenever we look at the inland race, they have actually adapted a different method of seed dispersion. So what happens is these trees catch on fire and they burn all the way up to the crowns of the trees. And the cones themselves have this waxy coating. And as it heats up, it kind of becomes more gelatinous and less of a solid. And these cones are able to open up. And then as the fire moves on through, the seeds drop out or pop out of these small cones. So it's really neat that we have the same species but two well-defined races that are basically different populations or subpopulations that have a completely different method of dispersing seed and different requirements depending on the isolation of that community and that subpopulation and the conditions that they've been exposed to for vast amounts of time to basically aid in the dispersals of their seeds so that the species can thrive. Here we have these small serratonous cones of the Florida sand pine.